The week of May 4th, 2026, unfolds like a slow-burning storm, one that begins with whispers and glances, but steadily crescendos into emotional confrontations, fractured loyalties, and choices that threaten to redefine the very fabric of relationships at Forrester Creations. Beneath the polished surfaces of success and legacy lies a volatile mix of ambition, resentment, love, and fear. Each character stands at a crossroads, and every decision, no matter how small, ripples outward with consequences no one can fully predict. Monday arrives with a sense of unease lingering in the air, as if something long concealed is finally ready to emerge. The mystery surrounding Dylan deepens, its tension coiling tighter with every passing moment. For days, perhaps weeks, the anonymous calls have gnawed at him, subtle at first, then increasingly intrusive, like a voice reaching from the past or from a place he thought he had long escaped. When the caller's identity is finally revealed, the moment lands not with explosive drama, but with a chilling clarity. It is someone who knows him deeply, perhaps too deeply. The revelation is not just about who made the call, but why. Motives matter, and here, they are layered with emotion, resentment, longing, maybe even vengeance. Dylan is forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that his past is not as buried as he believed, and that the choices he once made are circling back with quiet determination. At the same time, Liam finds himself immersed in a different kind of challenge, one that is less personal, but no less significant. Katie's design dilemma has become a source of frustration not only for her, but for the entire creative team. The pressure to innovate while staying true to the brand's identity weighs heavily, and failure is not an option. Liam steps in with a solution that is both practical and inspired, demonstrating not only his understanding of the business, but also his ability to see beyond the immediate problem. Yet beneath this professional triumph lies a subtle tension. His involvement is not entirely neutral. His connection to the people involved complicates his role. Success here may come at a cost elsewhere, and whether he fully realizes that remains uncertain. Tuesday intensifies the emotional stakes. Dylan, still reeling from the revelation of his mysterious caller, finds himself trapped in a moral and emotional dilemma. The knowledge he now holds is powerful, but also dangerous. To act on it could mean exposing truths that others are not ready to face. To remain silent could mean allowing those truths to fester and grow more destructive. His internal conflict is palpable: duty versus fear, honesty versus self-preservation. Every path forward seems fraught with risk, and the weight of indecision begins to take its toll. Meanwhile, RJ steps into a role that demands both courage and conviction. His vow to protect Elektra is not made lightly. It is born from a recognition of the vulnerabilities she faces and the threats that loom around her. There is a sincerity in his promise, a determination that speaks to his growth as a character. Yet such declarations are never simple. Protection implies danger, and danger, in this world, rarely comes without complications. RJ's resolve will be tested, not just by external forces, but by the limits of his own strength and understanding. Hope, on the other hand, reaches a breaking point. Her conflict with Steffi has been simmering for some time, fueled by misunderstandings, competing visions, and deeply personal grievances. But now, the tension erupts. Hope's inability to endure any longer is not a sign of weakness, but of exhaustion, emotional, mental, and perhaps even moral. She has tried to navigate the situation with patience, but patience has its limits. Her confrontation with Steffi is charged with emotion, each word carrying the weight of unspoken frustrations. This is not merely a disagreement. It is a clash of identities, of values, of what each woman believes she deserves. Wednesday brings a shift in tone, though not necessarily a reduction in intensity. Brooke's attempt to reconcile with Katie is a moment of vulnerability, a gesture that speaks to her desire for unity and healing. The history between them is complex, marked by both love and betrayal. To extend an olive branch requires courage, but also a willingness to confront the past honestly. Brooke's offer is sincere, yet it is tinged with uncertainty. Will Katie accept it? Can old wounds truly be healed, or will they continue to shape their interactions in subtle, insidious ways? At the same time, Daphne enters the narrative with an offer that is as enticing as it is enigmatic. Her proposal to Dylan is not just an opportunity, it is a test. It promises a way forward, perhaps even a way out of the dilemma he faces. But nothing comes without a price. Daphne's motives are not entirely transparent, and Dylan must weigh the potential benefits against the risks. Trust becomes a central issue. Who can he rely on, and who might be manipulating him for their own ends? Thursday escalates the drama once more, as Hope encourages Brooke to fight for what she deserves at Forrester Creations. This encouragement is more than a simple suggestion. It is a reflection of Hope's own struggles. She sees in Brooke a mirror of her own frustrations, her own sense of being undervalued or overlooked. The call to action is both empowering and dangerous. To fight is to challenge the status quo, to disrupt the delicate balance that holds the company and the family together. Carter's warning to Ridge and Steffi adds another layer of tension. His perspective is grounded in pragmatism and understanding of the broader consequences of their actions. He sees what others might overlook, that decisions made in the heat of emotion can have far-reaching implications. His warning is not just about immediate fallout, but about the long-term stability of the company and the relationships that sustain it. Whether Ridge and Steffi heed his advice remains to be seen, but the gravity of his words cannot be ignored. By Friday, the week's conflicts converge in a series of emotionally charged moments. Steffi's frustration with Hope reaches new heights, fueled by the words that have been exchanged and the wounds that have been inflicted. Her anger is not without justification, but it is also not without consequence. In her determination to assert herself, she risks pushing others further away, deepening the divisions that already exist. Donna's concern about Katie introduces a quieter, yet equally significant, thread. Her fear that Katie may be undermining the family speaks to a deeper anxiety about unity and loyalty. Families, like businesses, rely on trust and cooperation. When those elements begin to erode, the entire structure becomes unstable. Donna's perspective is shaped by her desire to protect what they have built, but also by her understanding of how fragile it can be. As the week draws to a close, the various storylines intertwine, creating a tapestry of emotion and intrigue. The mystery of Dylan's collar, the professional challenges faced by Liam and Katie, the evolving dynamics between Brooke and Katie, the escalating conflict between Hope and Steffi, all of these threads contribute to a narrative that is both compelling and unpredictable. At its core, this week is about choices and consequences. Each character is confronted with decisions that will shape not only their own futures, but the futures of those around them. The tension arises not just from the events themselves, but from the uncertainty of what lies ahead. In a world where appearances often mask deeper truths, the challenge is not just to act, but to understand, to see beyond the surface and recognize the underlying forces at play. What makes this narrative particularly engaging is its emphasis on internal conflict. External events provide the framework, but it is the characters' inner struggles that give the story its depth. Dylan's dilemma, Hope's breaking point, Brooke's vulnerability, Steffi's frustration, these are not just plot points, but expressions of human emotion in all its complexity. They remind us that even in a world of glamour and success, the most significant battles are often those that take place within. In the end, the week leaves us with more questions than answers. Who can be trusted? What sacrifices will be required? And perhaps most importantly, can the bonds that hold these characters together withstand the pressures they now face? The answers will unfold in time, but for now, the tension lingers, a reminder that in this world, nothing is ever truly settled. The ocean had a way of telling the truth when no one else would. It spoke in restless waves that refused to be silenced, in the salt-heavy wind that slipped through open windows and unsettled even the most carefully constructed thoughts. That afternoon, the beach house stood quiet against the horizon, bathed in a pale, indifferent light. Inside, Will Spencer sat alone on the sofa, the stillness around him thick enough to feel like pressure against his chest. The front door had only just closed behind his mother, and yet her presence lingered. Her questions, her knowing look, her refusal to accept the version of reality he had tried so hard to sell. He reached for the bag of chips almost absent-mindedly, the crinkle of plastic loud in the silence. It was a simple act, instinctive, something to occupy his hands when his mind refused to settle. He poured chili sauce over the chips with a careless precision, as though the ritual itself might ground him, might keep him tethered to something ordinary. But nothing about this moment was ordinary, no matter how hard he tried to make it so. Because the truth was already there, rising to the surface whether he acknowledged it or not. Melissa Dillon. The name alone carried a weight he could no longer ignore. It slipped into his thoughts uninvited, yet welcome, like a melody he had heard once and could never forget. He didn't resist it. Not this time. Instead, something shifted inside him, something subtle, almost imperceptible, and then he smiled. It was not a calculated smile. It wasn't the careful, reassuring expression he wore when he spoke to Electra, nor the composed neutrality he offered his family. This was different. This was unguarded, honest in a way that felt almost dangerous. It spread across his face without permission, a quiet admission of something he had been denying for far too long. "Of course you are, Will." An imaginary voice seemed to echo in the stillness, sharp with irony. "Of course you're keeping your distance." The smile lingered, deepened even, as though mocking the very idea. Because he wasn't keeping his distance. Not even close. For 3 weeks, he had told anyone who would listen that Dillon was just a friend. That he was helping her out of kindness, out of obligation, out of some vague sense of decency that required no further explanation. He had repeated the story so many times that it had begun to sound convincing, even to himself, at least on the surface. But beneath that carefully constructed narrative, something else had been growing. Something quieter, more persistent, and infinitely more complicated. And that smile, small, fleeting, but undeniable, shattered the illusion completely. It was the kind of truth that didn't need words. Every woman in the Forrester orbit who had trusted him, who had believed in his loyalty and his reassurances, would have seen it instantly. That single moment would have undone everything he had spent weeks building. Because no matter how convincing his words had been, his actions and now his unguarded reactions told a different story. Will Spencer was in love with Dillon. The realization didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It had been forming for days, maybe longer, weaving itself into his thoughts in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. And yet, in this quiet moment, with nothing but the sound of the ocean and the taste of chili on his tongue, it felt undeniable. The camera, unseen, unnoticed, captured it all. That was the cruel irony of it. Will believed he was alone. He believed this was a private moment, a fleeting lapse in the carefully maintained distance he had promised to keep. He didn't know that this was the moment everything became clear, not just to him, but to anyone willing to look closely enough. Because the truth has a way of revealing itself when no one is watching. Or when you think no one is. Earlier that day, Katie had walked into the beach house carrying groceries, her presence both familiar and quietly disruptive. She had always had a way of cutting through pretense, of seeing things others preferred to ignore. It was a quality that had served her well, and one that made her particularly dangerous in moments like this. Will had tried to brush her off, to dismiss her concerns with casual reassurance. He told her the groceries weren't necessary, that everything was fine, that she didn't need to worry. But Katie hadn't come for the groceries. Not really. She had come because she had been watching, observing, piecing together the subtle shifts in her son's behavior that others might have overlooked. She sat down, her expression calm but far from passive, and began to speak with a clarity that left little room for denial. She had seen the way he defended Dillon, again and again, without hesitation. She had noticed how quickly he dismissed Ivy's accusations, how instinctively he positioned himself on Dillon's side. It wasn't just loyalty. It wasn't just kindness. It was something deeper, something more personal. Katie wasn't naive. She didn't need a confession to understand what was happening. And she wasn't afraid to say it. Her words were direct, cutting through his carefully constructed defenses with unsettling precision. She warned him, plainly, without embellishment, that he was risking everything. That Electra, the woman he had promised himself to, could slip away. That RJ, with his quiet strength and unwavering presence, was already there, already watching, already waiting. Will had dismissed her concerns with practiced ease. He spoke as though the truth was self-evident, as though his loyalty was unquestionable. He insisted that Dylan was just a friend, that nothing had changed, that everything was exactly as it should be. But even as he spoke, something in his tone betrayed him.
Katie saw it.
She saw the hesitation, the subtle shift, the gap between what he said and what he felt. And when she left, she didn't argue further. She didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken aloud, and it lingered in the space between them long after the door closed. Now, alone again, Will reached for another chip, the motion almost mechanical. The chili sauce burned faintly, a sharp contrast to the dull ache forming in his chest. He leaned back against the sofa, staring out toward the ocean, but his thoughts were far from the horizon. They circled back, again and again, to Dylan. To the way she had looked at him when she first arrived, uncertain but determined. To the quiet moments they had shared, the conversations that stretched longer than they should have, the silences that felt strangely comfortable. To the way he had found himself paying attention to her moods, noticing the smallest changes in her expression, adjusting his own behavior without even realizing it. He told himself it was concern, responsibility, compassion. But none of those explanations felt sufficient anymore. Because compassion didn't make your heart race when someone walked into the room. Responsibility didn't make you smile when you thought no one was watching. And concern, no matter how genuine, didn't make you choose one person over everyone else. Yet that was exactly what he had done. He had chosen Dylan, not in a single, dramatic moment, but in a series of small, almost imperceptible decisions. He had chosen to defend her, to support her, to keep her close, even when it complicated everything else in his life. He had chosen to prioritize her needs, her safety, her presence, above his own commitments. Above Electra. That was the part he struggled to confront. Because Electra wasn't just anyone. She was his fiancée, the person he had promised to build a future with. She trusted him, believed in him, saw in him something steady and reliable, something worth holding on to. And for a long time he had believed it too. But now, the certainty that had once defined his feelings for her felt distant. Not gone, but altered in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It was as though something had shifted beneath the surface, changing the foundation without immediately collapsing the structure. He still cared about Electra. That much was undeniable. But the nature of that care had changed. And deep down, he knew it. The truth was uncomfortable, even painful, because it forced him to confront a version of himself he didn't particularly like. A version that wasn't as loyal or as consistent as he had always believed. A version that could hurt someone he genuinely cared about without intending to. But intention didn't erase impact. And the longer he denied what was happening, the worse the eventual fallout would be. Somewhere else, in another part of the city, Liam was beginning to piece it together as well. He had always been perceptive, particularly when it came to matters of loyalty and emotional alignment. It wasn't just about what people said, it was about where their attention lingered, where their instincts guided them when they thought no one was paying attention. He had seen it in Will. The way his brother hovered around Dylan, the way his focus seemed to shift whenever she was nearby. It was subtle, easy to dismiss if you weren't looking closely. But Liam was looking, and what he saw didn't align with the story Will was telling. He understood that kind of contradiction better than most. He had lived it, had felt the tension between obligation and desire, between what was expected and what felt undeniably real. It wasn't a comfortable place to be, and it rarely ended cleanly, which was why he couldn't ignore it. His conversation with Finn that week wasn't directly about Will, but the parallels were impossible to miss. They spoke about Steffi, about hope, about the complexities of relationships strained by competing loyalties and unresolved emotions. But beneath the surface, there was another layer, a recognition that these patterns repeated themselves, that people often found themselves drawn in directions they hadn't planned, and that those choices came with consequences. Back at the beach house, Will set the empty bag of chips aside, his appetite fading as quickly as it had appeared. The moment of clarity that had brought him that unguarded smile now lingered as something heavier, something harder to ignore. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. He could still try to deny it, of course. He could continue telling the same story, repeating the same reassurances, hoping that if he said it enough times, it might become real again. But the smile, that unguarded, honest reaction, had already betrayed him. And sooner or later, others would see it too. Electra, perhaps most of all. She had already shown a remarkable capacity for patience, for understanding. She had welcomed Dylan with a grace that masked her own discomfort, choosing compassion over confrontation even when it would have been easier to react otherwise. But patience had limits. And understanding, no matter how generous, could not survive indefinitely in the face of contradiction. If she saw what the camera had captured, if she saw that smile, everything would change. Because some truths don't need to be explained. They simply need to be seen. And when they are, they leave no room for doubt. The question was no longer whether Will was keeping his distance. The question